tensions between China and India seem to have stabilized in the last few years. But still, the border is still a hot zone. Things could still turn sour there very quickly. And there's still very heavy military presence from both sides along the borders on the plateau. So where do you see China-Indian relations going forward in the next, 10 to 15-year timeline?
Well, I'm deeply concerned about the future of China-India relations, and I'm very troubled that relations took a very sharp turn downwards after the June 2020 Galwan incident, where, as you know, there was a clash between Chinese and Indian soldiers. I think most Asian countries would like to see a stable, relatively peaceful and a calm and stable relationship between China and India. I think China and India will never become good friends. There's unfortunately reservoirs of suspicion that have been built up towards each other, especially in India, towards China. So they'll never become good friends. But in international relations, you don't depend on friendships, you depend on interests. And if India's goal is to emerge as the next manufacturing power after China, and it can do so, if it does a rational calculation of how to become a manufacturing power, it will realize that to do so, it will still need to get lots of components from China. And so trading more with China, which is something that Indians have been trying to avoid, may actually not harm India, may benefit India's economy and enable India's economy to grow faster. You know, as you know, for example, India has sadly refused to join the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. And the Indians explain publicly, it's not a secret, that the reason why they didn't join the RCEP because they're afraid if they join this free trade agreement, there will be a surge of Chinese exports to India, and India would then suffer. Yes. But actually, paradoxically, even though India thought that by not joining RCEP, it was taking away an advantage from China, actually, by not joining RCEP, India was giving an advantage to China. Because if India had joined RCEP, there would have been more competition for the Indian economy. The more competition for the Indian economy, the better it would perform. And Indians can compete very well. You can see this, you can see how well Indians do in the United States in leading the biggest corporations in the world. They're not run by ethnic Chinese, they're run by ethnic Indians. So RCEP would have provided more competition to the Indian economy, and that would have boosted India's economic growth and enabled India to catch up faster with China. Again, this is an example of where if you do your calculations of long-term strategic calculations correctly, you will then end up in the right position. But so fortunately though, relations between China and India seem to be stabilizing somewhat over the last 12 months or so. And I hope that they will continue to remain stable. They will never become good friends, but if they can avoid conflict, avoid painful tensions at the border, and just continue to cooperate, then that in the world will be very happy with China and India.
But all the traditional factors like geopolitics, economy, and demographics, they all seem to stipulate that this would be a long-term, even fiercer competition between these two Eastern powers than between China and the US, which could be more of a near-term crisis, but between India and China, this could be the competition of the next century. What do you think about that?
Well, I think, as you know, the gap between China and India is much larger than the gap between US and China. I think, as I said at the very beginning of my remarks, Joe Biden said he's not going to allow China to catch up with United States, because China is getting closer and closer, even though it's fallen back the last 2 years. But India is very far behind. The Chinese economy is 5 times bigger than the Indian economy is. There's no way that India can catch up with China in the next 10 to 20 years. And on the border, there is a rational solution that was first proposed by Premier Chou En-lai to Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru in the early 1960s. And there was another second time that Deng Xiaoping proposed to Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi. And the proposal was for India to retain Arunachal Pradesh, which is claimed by China, and for China to retain Aksai Chin, that is claimed by India, and then you can settle the small pockets. So there is a solution. In fact, I have launched something called the Asian Peace Program, and an Indian writer has proposed that this should be the formula for settling the border issue. But this can only be done if both China and India have strong leaders, like the kind of Mao and Deng, who can create these kinds of major compromises. So at the end of the day, fortunately, if you have strong leaders on both sides, this problem can be solved.
So instead of trying to take advantage of these tensions like the US and Europe to a certain degree have done, what about ASEAN? What do you think ASEAN could do in terms of trying to bridge these gaps and differences?
Well, ASEAN already does it, because the ASEAN countries have an annual meeting called the East Asian Summit.
Right.
And at these annual meetings, frequently the President of the United States, the President of China, the Prime Minister of India, Prime Minister of Japan, President of Russia, Putin, they all come for this ASEAN meeting. So when ASEAN has the capacity, has what you call convening power, it can bring together all the major leaders of the world. And that's a great asset that ASEAN has, because everybody trusts ASEAN. There are not many such organizations around the world like ASEAN, which are trusted by everybody. And ASEAN is trusted by everybody.